I don't spook easy on westerns, but this one holds like frost on iron. A broke night hand, a rancher who kept a lantern lit since spring, boot prints that don't lie, a breech turned in a whiteout, and a ring forged from a horseshoe. Come see what walking beside really means. The coach lurched off the frozen grade like a tired animal, iron rims skittering over rutted ice. Mara Whitcomb rode it down with her jaw set and her fingers gone to wood inside split gloves. Each breath left a white thread in the dark. Somewhere a door banged. Somewhere a coyote made a thin sound and let the wind carry it. Snowshoe Crossing was a short string of buildings pitched against the weather. A hotel with a crooked porch, a smithy blackened with old smoke, 2 storefronts shuttered tight. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. And the Blue Lantern Saloon leaking lamp glow through bat wings that never quite met. The town's sign wore a crust of hoarfrost. The letters looked chewed. Mara climbed down, boots scraping the step, the last of her coins counted twice in her pocket, and still not enough for a warm room. She shouldered a small carpet bag that had seen too much road and smelled of lye soap and horse. The driver touched brim and said, "Midnight's mean as a lone man, miss." Then he popped the brake and left her to it. The handbill was folded square in her bodice. Midnight hand needed, foaling watch, room, and board. That scrap was the thinnest of promises, but it was the only one that hadn't stepped away from her. She crossed to the saloon with the kind of walk that told men she'd heard every word they were about to say, and none of it mattered. Inside was heat and whiskey and a piano working at a hymn it didn't believe in. Tobacco hung blue over card tables. Boots turned. A few faces did, too. Mara kept her eyes on the bar and laid the handbill flat. "I'm here for the midnight work," she said. The barkeep, a large-shouldered man with a towel that only remembered being white, jerked his chin toward the corner. "That'll be Cole McAllister." He sat alone, hat brim shading eyes the color of morning river ice. Not old, not soft. He had the look of a man who'd quit sleeping long enough to make peace with it. He didn't stand when she came, he just made space with his hand, and she took the chair as if it had been meant for her all along. "You read the hours," he said. His voice had some gravel in it, the kind that doesn't wash out. "I keep 2 hours fine," she said, "and horses better." "We foal 'em right," he said. "Quiet, clean. You'll log each check, wake me if a mare quits looking right. Pays 14 a week, room and board in a cabin that keeps the wind out most days." "Most days will do." She looked straight at him. "I need work that's mine by right of my hands." "Not charity." A corner of his mouth lifted. "I don't hire for charity." Someone laughed from the faro table. A chair squealed. The piano tried again. The saloon door breathed in a sheet of cold, and an old fellow slid through it sideways. Snow in his whiskers, coat patched at the elbows. He tipped 2 fingers at Mara without asking who she was. "Keep that lantern honest, girl. Night tests folks." Then he drifted to the stove like smoke. "Old Zeb," the barkeep said to no one. Cole's gaze hadn't left Mara. "You start tonight." "Name's Mara Whitcomb. Lantern Ridge Ranch," he said, as if that answered something she hadn't asked. They signed nothing. Paper didn't hold much on this side of the mountains. He stood, and she saw the breadth of him under the wool coat and the careful way he moved, like a man who knew where his boots were every inch of the way. He gathered her bag as if it weighed more than it did, and let her take it back again without comment. Outside, the cold cut close and honest. The moon had lost its edges in blown cloud. They climbed into a wagon whose boards gave a clean creak. 2 bay horses stamped, breath pluming, harness ringing soft. Cole set the lines and didn't rush the team or the talk. Town fell away in 3 turns. Fences rose out of the dark and went past. cottonwoods stood with their fingers bare, the road found its own ruts, and the wagon let it. Snow hissed under runners where the wind had planed it smooth. "You from far," he said at last. "Far enough." She flexed her hands, feeling the ache return. "I can read a mare's eye. I can turn a foal if I have to. I don't spook, and I don't chatter when an animal's listening." "That'll do." A mile later, he added, "Almost to the team. There's a bell on the barn door. If you pull it, men will come. We keep order without noise if we can." "Rustlers?" she asked. "Sometimes the wind," he said. "Sometimes men that think they're the wind." The land opened, and the dark lifted just enough to show posts and a long roofline beyond them. A pin of light hung steady where the yard should be, neither bright nor failing. Cole nodded toward it, something easing in his mouth. "Lantern Ridge," he said. "And that lantern," she waited, "been kept lit since spring." He didn't say why. She didn't ask. The bays took the last stretch at a patient walk, iron shoes biting. Mara pulled her coat close at the throat, breath burning clean in her chest, and let the small, stubborn light work on her the way a hand rubbed warmth back into numb fingers. Slow, a little painful, but true. The cabin they gave her sat a little off from the bunkhouse, whitewash showing through the winds, scouring, a single window clouded with breath frost from the inside. The latch worked honest. The pot-belly stove sulked until she fed it dry kindling and a twist of newspaper. Then it drew with a low throat sound and put a red circle on the iron. She held her hands over it till the sting eased out of her fingers. There was a narrow bed, a peg rail, a basin, and a small shelf with coffee, flour, and salt. A pitcher wore a skin of ice she had to crack a spoon. The pump out back came stiff, each pull a complaint, but the water it gave was clean and cold enough to make her teeth hum. She washed road dust off her face and felt human again. A knock came. The door opened half a hand's width, and a woman pushed through the rest of the way, with a tray balanced on a hip. "Mercy McCrae," she said, setting down biscuits, stew, and a jar of something that looked like pickled sunshine. "Eat? What? It's hot. Cold'll crawl into your bones, and rent a room." "Thank you, ma'am." "I answer to Mercy." Her eyes did a quick inventory, boots, coat, the way Mara's hands trembled, but her mouth said nothing unkind. "Barn's this way when you're ready." Juniper's looking thoughtful. They crossed a yard ribbed with old tracks. Lanterns marked the way. Small moons hung at a man's height. The barn doors wore new snow like a shawl. Inside was warmth that rose from the straw and animals, the breath of 20 heads steadying the air. Leather and sweet hay, iron and iodine, the smells struck a part of Mara that had been hungry for months. A long bell rope hung by the sliding door. Mercy gave it a slap so Mara could hear the tongue answer up in the dark rafters. "You pull that, men come running. Don't be proud. Proud gets colts dead." A red-headed man with a beard like wire stepped out of the tech room, a curry comb in his fist. "Red Nolan," he said. "I keep the horses honest." He looked Mara over the way a farrier looks a hoof, checking for cracks. "You the midnight hand, if you'll have me." "Not my say," Red shrugged, but his eyes softened a hair. "Ledger's on the nail by Juniper's stall. Write what you see, don't decorate it." A younger man drifted by with a stack of folded blankets. He had Cole's eyes, only warmer. "Tate McAllister," he said, voice pitched so it wouldn't jangle the horses. "If anything breaks on paper, I fix it. If it breaks off paper, Red cusses at it first." Mara worked the row, looking in on each mare. Ears forward, ears flat, the long, quiet conversation of animals who knew the night better than people did. At the last stall, Juniper shifted her weight, tail lifted, a ripple moving along her belly like wind under canvas. "Evening, girl," Mara said, keeping her body sideways to be small. She ran her hand along the mare's flank and felt the skin twitch. Milk waxed the teats, the muscles along the croup went soft under her palm. Not long now. She set a kettle on the little iron plate in the corner, laid out clean twine, a short bottle of carbolic, a square of folded linen. She washed, dried, and warmed her hands over the kettle until feeling returned. Then she waited. The trick to most work was knowing when not to do it. Boots came and stopped at the stall door. She didn't turn. "Evening," Cole said, voice kept low. "Evening," she answered. She's rolling the thought around. No push yet. He leaned on the rail with his hat in his hands, eyes on the mare, not on Mara. That was a kindness. The minutes clicked past like slow beads. Juniper paced, pawed, then let out a long sigh and went down neat, shoulder to straw, head tucked. The first contraction took her and left her, and then the bag showed slick and perfect. Mara moved when it was time and not before. She checked the mouth for membrane, swept it clear, found two hooves pointed right, the velvet of a nose pressing behind. "Easy," she said to the mare and to herself both. "You're doing fine." Cole handed what she needed before she asked for it. Clean rag, fresh line, lamp adjusted down so the light pooled warm and didn't shout. The foal slid by inches, paused, then came on a long, wet shin to Mara's hands. A colt bright as a new coin under the straw dust, legs all question marks and promise. Juniper turned, blew on him, and the colt twitched, coughed, and pulled air like he meant to keep doing it for years. Mara stripped the bag back from his ears, rubbed him wick with the linen until his chest worked steady, then sat back on her heels and let them have each other. "Good hands," Cole said, and it sounded like he was admitting a private truth. "Good mare," she said, "because credit belongs where it settles." They watched the colt try the world with his knees. Fail, try again, and find it. Mara logged the time, the weather, the notes that matter to men and to memory. Tate drifted past, grinning without noise. Red muttered something approving that still managed to sound like a warning to fate. When the barn had settled back into its big night breath, Mara stepped out. The sky showed a thin seam of stars where the clouds had frayed. Her cabin window threw a small square of gold on the snow. A tin thermos waited on her step, faint steam coming off its cap. A scrap of paper was tucked under the wire handle, the letters blocky and careful. Much obliged. C. No knock. No standing in her doorway to watch her read it. Just the thing itself and room around it. She poured a little in a cup, the coffee bitter and good and hot enough to burn the tip of her tongue, and stood under the porch lantern until her shoulders let go of their hitch. Inside, she set the thermos on the shelf, logged the last check, and blew the lamp down to a wick. The wind shouldered the cabin once, then went on to try its luck elsewhere. When she lay down, the straw crackled under the ticking like faraway frost. Sleep came in without argument. Somewhere out in the yard, the bell hung quiet. The lantern on the post burned a steady coin of light. It looked like it had been waiting for a long time and intended to keep at it. Dawn came gray and stingy, the kind that doesn't bother with a sunrise. The wind had blown itself thin. Snow lay tight as canvas, the kind that squeaks under a boot. Mara crossed the yard with her shoulders hunched into a cold that reached for bone. Her breath hung behind her like thread. Red Nolan met her halfway, jaw bristled with frost. "Fence on the north line's got ideas," he said. He held up a length of wire that should have been tied to a post and wasn't. The cut was clean, not weather, not a cow. A man's work. They saddled quick and quiet. The bay's hides steamed in pale light. Out past the cottonwoods the world opened into white and low sage, pulled thin by winter. At the break in the fence, Red crouched and tapped the snow with 2 fingers. Boot prints, 2 men, maybe 3. One drags his right foot. A hare. Mara looked where he pointed. The sign was there if you let your eyes soften. Ellipses of pressed crust, a careless toe scrape, a shallow gouge where a spur had nipped. The trail ran north toward the breaks and the folded land that could hide 100 bad notions. Cole came up from the far side, hoarse blowing, eyes narrowed against glare. He didn't cuss. He didn't say much at all. He studied the wire ends, the posts, the way the grass bent under the snow along the bottom strand. Then he looked at Red. "They testing us or tugging cattle?" "Testing," Red said. "Wind last night would have scattered any they took." Cole nodded once. "We fixed the fence. We don't chase ghosts into bad country on a cold morning." The sheriff showed about the time they finished pulling the new stretch tight. Lyle Mercer had a face like blunted iron and a hat that had seen too much weather. He swung down slow, took in the wire, the prints, the way Cole's jaw rode its hinge. He knelt, pressed a glove into one of the tracks, and came up with snow stuck to the leather. "Fresh," he said. He squinted north. "Here tell Judd Kincaid has boys wintering along the breaks. Close enough to smell a calf drop. Close enough to listen to your sleep." Red spat into the snow where it froze before it sank. "Kincaid's a coyote, thinks he's a wolf." Mercer's eyes flicked to Mara without asking her business. He clicked his tongue once, considering the trail, the wind, the lay of the land. Then he said a thing like a proverb he didn't bother explaining. "Snow don't lie, it just waits." Cole's mouth went thinner. "We'll be waiting with it." They turned back when the cold had worked through coats and into marrow. Mercy had coffee standing thick in the pot, biscuits ragged and hot, a pan of beans that held the stove's heat like a secret. She set a plate in front of Mara and another in front of Cole and whacked Red's knuckles with a wooden spoon when he reached too soon. "Eat while you can. Trouble eats quicker." It was Tate who said, casual as idle talk, "You'll take supper at the big house." "Tonight, Miss Whitcomb." "Mercy's orders. Says a body who works the midnight ought to see a table when it's set proper once in a while." Mara wiped gravy with biscuit and didn't argue. A warm room and a chair at a real table could be had without owing anything but thanks, and she had thanks to give. The big house wore its age with a straight back. Inside, the heat held without pushing. A long table ran under a window that looked west to the Brakelands. Mercy set pork roast and potatoes heavy with butter and a dish of green beans that had come out of summer and a jar somehow at the same time. Tate talked enough for 2 men and Cole, which let the room feel easy. After the plates went empty and Mercy chased them away from her cleanup, Tate peeled off on some paper errand that looked suspiciously like giving space. Cole led Mara down a hall to a small room with a door that made a good sound when it closed. "Eleanor's library," he said, not like he was showing off anything, but like he was visiting a grave with better light. Books ran 2 shelves high, leather-scarred, spines warm from hands that had turned them when the wind was bad, and the lamps were low. Mara trailed a finger over titles. Tennyson with a cracked hinge, Shakespeare in 2 volumes, a frontier almanac annotated in a tidy woman's hand. There were pencil marks in the margins, little notes that argued gently with the printed word. "She made us read aloud," Cole said, his thumb worrying the brim of his hat without his knowing it. "Said a man who can't hear his own voice in a room has no business raising it anywhere else." Mara smiled at that, because it sounded like a mother who'd stood her ground in a land that enjoys pushing. "Did you have a favorite?" "Not favorites," he said, "but there's one she read when the wind came off the breaks, and the roof popped. Be strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. She said it kinder than the page does." Mara took the Tennyson down, let it fall open where it wanted. The paper smelled like dust and summer, and something faint she thought might be soap. For a long minute the two of them stood in a quiet that didn't crowd. When she left, the sky had gone indigo. Cold had crept back into the seams of things. Cole walked her as far as the porch, then farther, then all the way to her cabin without making a ceremony of it. At the door he stopped, tested the latch with 2 fingers, and frowned at the way it wobbled. He pulled a jackknife from his pocket, eased a screw that had worked loose, and set it home with the tip of the blade, careful as a man fixing a watch. He tried the latch again. It caught solid. He didn't say there or you're welcome. He stepped back into the lantern wash, the light putting edges on the planes of his face. "Bell's right where Mercy hung it," he said. "Pull it if you don't like the shape of anything you see." "I will," Mara said. She could feel her breath on her lip, cold and damp. "Thank you for supper, for the library." He tipped his hat. "It's there to be used." When the door closed behind her, she stood with her hand on the latch a moment longer than necessary. The room held the day's heat. The window showed her the yard in a small rectangle, the line of the barn roof, the bell rope dark against the lighter dark, the stump of an old cottonwood, and beyond it, the porch post where a lantern burned steady and unbothered by the thin wind. Out on the north line, the fence was mended. The boot prints would hold their shape till noon tomorrow, maybe. The name Kincaid had a way of staying in a man's ear after the talk stopped. Mara set her ledger on the table, sharpened her pencil with a small knife, and wrote, "Juniper Strong, Colt Nursing, North Fence Cut, repaired. Sheriff notified, wind light north, northeast, lantern steady. Belonging is a quiet thing when it starts. It lives in work done right, and a latch that catches, and a room with books under a mother's name." She wasn't ready to belong to a man, but the work felt like it knew her. The night did, too. She blew the lamp down and let the ranch make its sounds. The dark pressed to the window like a cat, and then lost interest. The lantern on the post kept its coin of light, the same coin she'd seen from the wagon when the world was still stranger than it was now. Evening put a thin blue lid on the land. The cold came on clean and mean, the kind that makes boards ring when you step wrong. Mara was halfway down the row when the side door groaned, and Cole shouldered in with Red behind him. Snow dusted their coats. Cole's sleeve was torn high and dark at the bicep. Red said it plain. "Wire wasn't cut this time." Somebody waited by it. Cole kept his voice level. "Spooked 'em off. One had a knife and no patience." He peeled the coat back. The shirt stuck. Blood had dried to a stiff rust line. Mara didn't waste talk. "Tack room," she said. "Sit." She shoved the kettle onto the iron plate, sloshed water, set out a bottle of carbolic, a strip of linen, and a short-necked bottle that smelled like a Saturday night. "This'll burn." "It's earned it," he said. She trimmed the shirt clear, washed the wound till the water pinked, and then ran clean. The cut was shallow, angled, a kiss from a blade that didn't get time to think. She poured the whiskey slow. Cole didn't flinch. He watched her hands the way a man watches weather, serious and without superstition. "Keep it dry," she said, binding him snug. "No swinging an axe like you're proving something." "Change the wrap come morning." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Red'll be disappointed." Red snorted. "Red's got 2 hands. Boss can spare the 1 bootsteps and a draft." Old Zeb slid in around the door, shook a lace of frost off his whiskers, and cocked his head at the smell of whiskey and carbolic. He looked at Mara, not the bandage, and flung a looped gray scarf her way. "Wind bites bone. Wear it." Then to Cole, tracks ran light and wide. "Boy out there drags his right foot." "Same as this morning, Mercer, no?" Cole asked. As if the name called him, Sheriff Lyle Mercer filled the doorway, snow stacked on his hat brim, a pace behind the wind. He reached into his pocket and set a flattened lead slug on the workbench top. The metal had a bright nick where it had kissed something harder than itself. Found it in your north post. Somebody fired to hear how quiet you were. He slid the lead back into his palm. Kincaid teaches boys to talk with their irons before they can ride a circle straight. Cole's jaw worked once, then went still. You aiming to warm a cell for him? I'm aiming to let the storm do part of my work, Mercer said. He glanced at the seams along the walls where the wind sang. Skies stacking up like a debt. White's coming. Tracks keep their mouth in weather like that. Red tugged his cap down. We'll double the watch. Mercer's eyes set on Mara for a breath, a question there and not voiced. He tipped his hat and left the way winter does, quiet and with promise. The barn took a long breath when the door shut. Horses settled. Juniper snored soft. The colt twitched in straw dreams. Mara finished the bandage clean, tied it off with a hitch that would hold through a long night, then stepped back to see if the man was going to argue with good sense. He didn't. He pulled his sleeve down slow, testing the wrap. You patch like a doctor I can afford. I patch so my animals don't die and my men don't rot, she said. It came out straighter than she meant, but truth doesn't like paint. His mouth tipped at one corner. You read as clean as you work? Depends what's on the page. They left Red to the row and crossed to the big house because Mercy had a habit of planting hot things on tables when a person looked likely to fall over. She did it now, set down stew that steamed and a heel of bread that knew butter. Eat, she said, wooden spoon pointing at both of them. Cold eats men faster than wolves. Cole obeyed like a man raised proper. Mara took the chair and let the stew run heat into her hands through the bowl. When the meat was gone and the spoon scraped bottom, he nodded toward the hall. You want another look at the books? She did. The library breathed warmer than the rest of the house, as if memory made its own weather. The lamp burned steady. She pulled Tennyson down again. The spine found the same soft place as before. She read a line quiet, and he finished it without looking, the words more lived in than recited. They didn't talk about the cot or the fence or the boy with the dragging foot. They let the poem be a small roof they could both stand under while the wind tested the eaves. When she closed the book, he said it in the tone of a man unloading without wanting pity. I haven't slept like a decent human since my father went in the ground. 5 years of hearing every hinge at once. 5 years of waking because I dreamed. I heard waking Mara set the book back in its seam. Then you know what it is to watch a night the way a hawk watches a fence line. He nodded once. Since spring it's been quieter. His eyes slid toward the porch where a shape of light touched the snow. Lantern helps a man remember what side he's on. She didn't ask what happened in spring. He didn't offer. Some things travel better when they're not pushed. Back at the barn, she checked each stall with the slow patience that keeps animals alive. The mares breathed clouds. The rafters ticked. Cole moved careful, bandaged arm, hugged close without making a fuss of it. When they reached the door, he stopped, rubbed a thumb across the bell rope's braid as if feeling for a fault. If you pull that, I'll hear it, he said, even if I'm dead asleep. You plan on that? She asked, meaning the sleep, not the death. Planning to try, he said, and there was a thin smile in it that wasn't for show. Outside, the sky had a green cast along the far ridges, a storm color that looks like old copper. The wind had backed to the north and smelled of iron. Snow squeaked underfoot the way it does when it's sharpened by cold. Mara walked the line to her cabin with the scarf Zeb had thrown looped twice at her throat, the wool holding the day's heat like a kept secret. On her step sat nothing this time, which felt right. She didn't need a thing, she needed the idea of things kept simple and honest. a latch that caught because someone had set the screw home, a bandage tied square, a bell rope within easy reach. A light left where a person could find it. She wrote the ledger clean, coal, laceration L, upper arm, cleaned, bandaged, change, AM, juniper strong, colt up and nursing, wind rising north, barometer falling, sky green on brakes, sheriff recovered flattened lead at north post, Kincaid sign. Lantern steady, she blew the lamp to a small blue, then out. Through the window the yard looked like a held breath. The post lantern burned its coin of fire without asking for thanks. Out past the fence a storm gathered itself, counting men and roofs the way a banker counts notes. Mara lay down with her coat folded over her feet and thought of how small a single gesture is. The toss of a scarf, a bandage tied right, a line of poetry shared soft. And how those small things put shoulder to shoulder can carry a winter. By mid-afternoon the sky had the color of old bruises, green laid under gray. The air turned metallic, a taste like a bitten coin. Men who'd been talking let sentences die of their own weight. The horses felt it first, ears cutting, hides twitching under blankets, a fret that ran the row like gossip. Red Nolan came in from the north line, ice caked to his mustache. "Ridge is smudged out," he said. "Can't see the cottonwoods till you're kissin' bark. We button up now or we pay later." Cole didn't bother with a speech. He moved the way weather moves when it knows its mind. "Zeb, swing the south gate. 2 drifts are starting there. Tate gets sand to the porch steps and the pump. Mercy." Mercy McCrae was already there with a sack of coarse salt and a kettle of something that steamed like good news. "Don't mercy me, I'm ahead of you," she said, slapping Red's hand away from the kettle. She turned to Mara and pressed a small cloth bag into her palm, heavy and warm. "Hold that, keeps the fingers working. Cold eats men faster than wolves. Eat when it's set in front of you, girl." Mara tucked the heat into her pocket and ran the barn in a slow, hard circuit. Extra straw down, water buckets topped and nudged into the warmest corners, lamp chimneys wiped clean so the light didn't smear, twine checked, blades oiled, long obstetric glove laid out where her hands would know to reach without looking. She worked from habit and from the part of her that had slept in barns more nights than beds. "Wire braced," Red called from the sliding door. Wind shoved back at his words. "I run lines from the gate post to the jam. If it tries to walk, it'll have to drag the whole county with it." Zeb came in sideways, hat brim loaded with snow, and thumped his palm against the bell rope just enough to make the tongue kiss the bronze. The sound climbed the rafters and came back settled. "Storm's a mean judge," he told no one and everyone. "She'll weigh what's stout and what's bluff." His eyes ticked to Mara's hands, the way she rolled her wrists, forcing blood into stiff fingers. He nodded once, satisfied, as if she were a gate he'd kicked and found sound. Sheriff Mercer eased through the door with a curl of spindrift at his boots, looking like a man who'd been carved out of the weather on purpose. "Boys with Kincaid went to ground," he said. "2 shacks along the breaks and 1 dugout where the creek kinks. I'll let the snow set a crust, and then I'll go collect what's owed." "You'll go alone?" Cole asked. "I'll go smart," Mercer said, which didn't answer the question out loud. He touched the bell rope same as Zeb had, a lawman's habit of finding the weight of a thing. "Wind's coming off the north, hard. Keep that lantern honest." The last light got caught and lost in the kind of hurry only winter knows. Snow arrived the way a curtain falls, not a flake at a time, but all at once. It scratched at the shingles and hissed under the door. The barn breathed deep and bowed its back. Timbers ticking, nails giving little pings like plucked strings. Mara took Juniper's temperature and listened to the colt work his small mill at the udder. She spoke low to each mare in turn, letting her voice live in the straw smell and the lamp glow. When she came to Sable, the big black mare with a star on her brow, the air around the stall felt tight as bandage. Sable's tail lifted, set, lifted again. Sweat slicked the skin along her flank, though the cold could have flensed a man. Milk had waxed. The croup felt loose as kneaded bread. "She's thinking about it," Mara said. Cole was already there, reading the same signs, not crowding. "You call it," he said. "You're the hands, I'm the light." That put a quiet in her chest she hadn't expected. He didn't say "my mare" or "my call." He said he'd set the lamp where she needed it, and stand in the wind she asked him to. She nodded once. Business returned to her bones. "We'll hang a second lamp," she said. "Not bright, just enough." Red shouldered a shovel and went to fight the drift building, like a living thing against the sliding door. Tate came with sand for the thresholds and for hooves that would need purchase when the time came to lift and brace. Mercy set a tray on a barrel, bowls nested in a towel so steam wouldn't show, a crock of tallow, a loaf cut thick. "You'll mind me and eat," she warned, eyes daring anyone to make her say it twice. Wind found every seam. It pressed the barn like a large hand testing bone. Sable shifted, blew, pawed, and let out a sound that started in her gut and came up through her teeth. Mara laid a palm along the mare's belly and felt the long roll of a contraction that gathered and faded. Not time yet, but close enough a person could hear the clock inside it. Somewhere out on the north line, wood popped in a way no living wood should. Red froze half a heartbeat, then went to the door and cracked it an inch. Snow muscled in. He squinted into that bright blank and closed it again. "Fences talking," he said. "Might just be weight. Might be more. Post a man at the harness room window," Cole said. "No shots unless a head comes over the top and makes a liar of the Lord." "I'll sit the bell," Zeb said, already dragging a stool where the rope hung. He looped it once around his palm, testing the bite. "You holler, I'll holler, and then we'll see what gets to us first, men or mercy." Mara checked Sable again. The mare's eye showed too much white and then settled when Mara's hand found the place at the throat latch, where breath and calm pass between species. "Easy, old girl," Mara said. "Don't spend it all arguing." The clock in the tack room clicked with the kind of certainty that belongs to machines and a few hard-built men. Outside, the world had turned to one color and no distance. The porch lantern at the big house burned a small, defiant coin, more felt than seen in the blown whiteness. Cole followed Mara's look and drew breath as if that light were oxygen. "She's held since spring," he said softly, not for comfort and not for show, but as if stating a fact might lend spine to a night. Mara pulled on the long glove and left it rolled at her wrist for speed. She laid out linen, carbolic twine, a small tin of lard, for her forearms to slide if they had to. She thought of hands she had learned from her father in a cold Pennsylvania barn, a neighbor woman with wrists like fence posts, and a laugh bigger than weather. She thought of all the small, stubborn things that outface a winter because they are too honest to know how to quit. Sable's next pain came sharp and true. The mare hunched, grunted, and swayed. A bag showed and then went away again. Mara felt the line of worry take a hitch in her own back and set her jaw against it. "Soon," she told Cole, and the word had iron in it. "Then we'll be ready," he answered, and the word had room. At the door, the drift shouldered higher. Red jammed a plank for a brace and spat into the snow where it blew back in his face and froze. Zeb sat with the bell rope running through his old hand like a live thing, eyes at half-mast, listening to the night the way a hunter listens to brush. Mercy set a bowl in Mara's hands without asking if she wanted it. "2 spoons," she commanded, "for you and that mare. Don't make me feed either of you." Mara ate because Mercy said so and because it put heat where she needed it. She wiped her mouth on her sleeve, took the lamp down 2 turns, and nodded to Cole. He moved where the light would work for her and not blind the animal. The wind thumped the siding. The bell rope twitched in Zeb's palm and settled. Sable lifted her head and gave a sound that made even Red look over. Mara slid the glove up her arm. "All right, girl," she said, voice steady and low. "Let's see what you brought us." And the storm leaned in like a judge listening for truth. "All right, girl," Mara said, and slid the long glove to her shoulder. The lamp chimed in the wind shiver, glass ticking. Sable's flank rolled hard under Mara's palm, then eased. Mara went in slow, knuckles tight to keep from nicking, breath measured so her chest didn't hurry the mare's. "What do you feel?" Cole asked, voice wrapped in cloth. "Wrong end," she said. "Tail first." "Breach." Her words fogged and went thin. "I need to push him forward, find both hocks, bring the legs right. If she stands, we let her. If she fights, you hold. I'll be the brace," he said, stepping to the head, hands on the halter, cheek near Sable's ear. "Easy, old girl. Easy now." Outside, the wind shouldered the door. The bell rope in the Zeb's palm twitched. He didn't pull yet. He listened like a man reading a river by sound. Red cracked the harness room window and peered north. Snow came horizontal, bright and empty as a lie. Mara felt past slick heat and muscle squeeze. A contraction took Sable and pinched the world to a fist. "Not now," Mara whispered to the mare and to the night both. When it passed, she slid her arm deeper, hand working blind and sure, mapping a foal she could not see. Tail, rump, the round of a thigh, the crease of a hock. One hind foot lay folded wrong. She found the pastern, cupped it, flexed the joint, and eased the hoof forward into the chute where it belonged. "That's one," she said, sweat starting on her temples despite the cold. "Plenty of night left for another," Cole murmured to Sable. "We're right here." Another pain lifted the mare. Mara pushed back against it with her forearm, buying inches. Her fingertips slid over bone, slick as river stone. She chased the second hawk, found it tucked tight. "Stubborn little cuss," she said, and the corner of her mouth wanted to smile but saved it for later. She hooked 2 fingers over the angle, folded, and drew the limb up alongside its mate. "Both hawks," she breathed. "Twine." Cole had it ready. She looped above each fetlock, knots quick and clean. "When she bears down, you pull when I say," she told him. "Not before. We don't tear her. We follow her. Your say," he answered. Zeb's voice came soft from the door. "Shapes on the fence." The bell lifted in his hand. "Reckon they fancy themselves the night." "Let 'em fancy," Red said. Seating around, he had no mind to waste. "We're keeping what's ours." "Not a shot unless they cross wood," Cole said, without looking up. "Noise spooks mothers." His hand tightened at Sandel's cheek. "You hear, old girl? We're keeping it quiet for you." The next contraction came like a rope drawn hard through a ring. Mara set her boots, bent her knees, and pulled on the twine with the easy, rolling strength of a teamster. Not a yank, but a steady arc downward, then out, timing to Shimal's push. The first hind hoof appeared, then the second, black and small and mean with promise. "Good," Mara said, not to anyone in particular. "Hips next. We'll turn him a whisper to keep from hanging him." Another pain. Mara rotated the foal a hair, felt the give of pelvis on pelvis, the narrowest pass known to stock and midwives. "Now," she said through her teeth, and Cole matched her pull with the kind of help that doesn't get in the way. At the harness window, a head rose over the fence and ducked again, hat brim loaded with snow. Zeb jerked the rope once. The bell voice leapt the rafters, clean and bright, as old as the barn and twice as stubborn. Red stepped out, cracked the door, and let the wind try to knock him down. He shouldered it back, fired 2 shots into the drift where sound would carry and bullets would bury a message without blood. The shape slid off the fence like a bad thought and was gone into the white. Inside, Sable braced, moaned through her teeth, and pushed the world forward. Mara kept pace. The hips slipped, and then they didn't. She rotated another hair, changed the angle, and felt the catch give. "There you go," she said, breath hot in the cold. "There you go, little man." "Come on." The hindquarters slid into her hands. She stripped the slick off the nostrils with the edge of her glove as the shoulders turned inside the mare, as old a physics as hunger. One more long pull time to one more long groan, and the black colt with a white star slid into straw, all legs and shine and silence in that first tight second. "Breathe," Mara ordered, rubbing him hard along the ribs with linen. "Don't you go choosing the wrong side of life tonight." He coughed, choked, and drew a ragged scrap of air, then another, better one. Sable rolled an eye, found him, and blew warm breath across his wet hide like she meant to keep him. Cole let his own breath out, and it hung in the light, like a prayer he'd forgot to say. "Cord," Mara said. Cole handed the twine. She tied, cut, checked the mare for a tear, and found none. Blessed the thin mercies the night allowed. She slid the colt to where Sable could lick him clean and wake his stubborn. He shook like a bad idea leaving a man, then sneezed milkless and offended. At the door, Zeb eased the rope back to stillness, palm flat against the braid. "Fence is quiet," he said. "Wind talked those boys into being wiser than they are." He sat again like he'd never stood. Red closed the door and set the brace with his shoulder. "Warned 'em good," he said. "Didn't waste powder on their hides." Mara sat back on her heels. Her arms hummed from the pull. The glove peeled away with a wet pop. Her shirt stuck at the cuffs. She didn't notice till the air bit her. Cole shrugged out of his wool coat and set it over her shoulders without a noise. Heat bloomed slow into the places the work had emptied. "You kept her alive," he said, "not grand, just true." "We did," she answered. "You held the light." He looked at the lamp as if measuring it against the one on the porch, and found them kin. "Light's only any good if it falls where the hands can use it." Sable blew again, rough-tongued and thorough. The colt got one knee under him, then 2, slid, grunted, and tried again with a mule's opinion of gravity. Mercy appeared like a woman written into a story right where the page needed her, set a mug in Mara's palm. "Drink," she said. "You look like a ghost that lost its way." It was coffee hot enough to scald a memory into the present. Mara sipped and felt her chest loosen. Red leaned on the stall rail, eyes gone soft. Zeb picked straw from his sleeve with great seriousness, as if ceremony held the barn together. Outside, the storm stumbled and then steadied, found its mean stride and kept it. Inside, the barn made its own weather, warm from breath and bodies, lamplight low and honest, men and one woman standing quiet because the thing worth noise had already been done. The bell hung still as a kept promise. The colt tried the world again and stuck it this time, legs splayed, head bobbing. Sable made a sound that had lived in mares since before towns had names. Cole rubbed a line down the colt's back with the back of his knuckles and then stepped away so the mare could have him whole. Mara wrote it in her head before she reached the ledger. Sable, Breach corrected. Live black colt, white star, beyond star, no tears. Nursing soon as he figures what he is. She let the coat sit heavy on her shoulders a moment longer and then stood, joints popping quiet. Cole's bandage had held. The linen showed clean where it should have bled through. He caught her look and lifted his arm like a man proving a roof after a gale. "You patch better'n most doctors," he said. "I patch what's mine to patch." She set the mug back on Mercy's tray. Tonight, that was a mare. Tomorrow, whatever walks in wrong end first. Cole's mouth bent. You talk like a person who intends to stay busy. Busy keeps a woman free, she said, and the truth of it warmed her better than the coat. They made another round, slow, checking water and straw and the kind of peace that can be measured by ears and eyes. When they reached the door, Cole touched the bell rope with 2 fingers and then let it go. The rope lay quiet. Through the crack, the porch lantern at the big house burned stubborn as ever, a small sun a man could steer by. Lantern's honest, Zeb said, as if the night had asked and needed telling. It is, Cole said. Mara pulled the coat tight and looked from the lamp in her hand to the lamp out there in the weather, and she felt something settle that hadn't since she'd stepped off a far coach in a different town with no right to expect any of this. The wind could have the yard and the fences and the first 10 words of a man's mouth. It could not have what the light reached and what steady hands could set right. Let's log him, she said. Then you'll change that wrap, like I told you. Cole nodded, and there was a tired smile in it. Your say, he said again. Outside, the storm went on counting roofs. Inside, a colt found milk, a mare found quiet, and the lantern found everything it meant to keep. Morning came blunt and pewter, the kind of light that makes a man feel he never quite woke. The storm had done its counting and moved on, leaving the yard lipped with drifts that showed a knife edge where the wind had cut them square. Every nail head on the barn door wore a sugar cap. Breath hung and didn't hurry off. Inside, the night's heat had faded to a hush. Sable drowsed with her lip loose, the black colt tucked to her belly, trying his legs in small, proud lies. Juniper's boy had learned the teats in earnest and worked them like a mill. Mara walked the row, soft, palm to flank, eye to ear. The mares met her glance and let it pass. Peace has a sound. She knew it and let herself stand in it a moment. Red came with a broom and a busted smile. All the posts still where God planted 'em, he said. North fence creaked like a liar at a prayer meeting, but it held. Zeb sat on his stool by the bell as if he'd grown there in the night. He waved off help and rose in one motion that made a mockery of his years. Roads drifted to a notion more than a road, he told the air, but a lawman with a stubborn hat can find his way. He meant Sheriff Mercer. The sheriff arrived as the day put on its meager shine, horse frosted to the knees, hat brim scalloped with rime. He swung down slow, stretched his back to make room for the cold to leave, and squinted along the ridge. Crust set just enough to take a print, he said. Your boys last night fancy they walked on wind. Turns out they walked on photographs. He touched 2 fingers to his hat, to Mara as much as to Cole. I'll fetch what's owed from Kincaid when the sun thinks about it. Won't wake the county to do it. He rode off the way winter men do, as if the weather was a thing they wore, not a thing they survived. The big house kitchen breathed like a living creature. Mercy McCrae had the stove hooped red and a line of bowls waiting in the steam. She planted one in front of Mara and another in front of Cole, then pointed her spoon at Red's fingers as they inched toward the skillet. You may be born hungry, Nolan, but I'll not let you die impolite. Eat first, fret later. The stew had marrow in it, and a heat that went farther than soup should. Cornbread, steamed where the knife had parted it. A crock of pickled something lit the tongue like a struck match. Tate blew in with his shoulders full of cold and news. Town's talking, he said, already wincing at Mercy's spoon and stepping out of its reach. Nothing mean from the men. Just the usual guesses about rustlers and the law. Some of the ladies, he cleared his throat, wonder how it is a girl keeps hours in a barn all night and keeps her good name besides. There it was, said plain and not cruel. Words have a way of finding a woman, even when she isn't in the room with them. Mara finished her spoonful, set the bowl down, and wiped her mouth with a thumb. Ladies can wonder, she said. I have work. Mercy's spoon dipped, came up, and pointed toward the window, not at Mara. Folks talk loudest when a storm's just gone and there's nothing left to push against. She set a napkin by Mara's bowl, soft as apology. They'll find something else by Sunday. Cole hadn't looked up from his stew, but his jaw had reset itself. Now he did look, straight at Mara, not stepping in front of her words or behind them. You want the wagon? You can have it, he said. You can go to town, buy what you please, answer nobody. Or you can stay put, and I'll go and hear it for myself. Stay if it's your choosing, not my asking. Mara watched him as a person watches a trail they mean to ride. Freedom spoken out loud is a skittish thing. A man can spook it without trying. He hadn't. The room eased a notch. I'll ride with Mercy, Mara said. Need needles, lamp chimneys, and a new pair of gloves before this weather eats the rest of my hands. Mercy slapped the counter like a judge done deciding. We'll go after I pull another pan. Tate, hitch the team and quit breathing like a bellows over my stove. Snowshoe Crossing wore the storm like a story. It was tired of telling. Shovels scraped. A man cursed adrift as if it had insulted his mother. The Blue Lantern saloon door swung and shut on laughter that had more relief than humor in it. The mercantile smelled of dry goods and wool and the faint sourness of mouse. Mercy traded a pie she didn't need for 2 lamp chimneys and a sack of needles. The storekeep pretended he'd won the bargain. Mara kept to her list and her pockets. Still, words found her by the pickle barrel and the bolt of calico. 2 women in bonnets tied tight, their voices bright and careful, like men handling glass. Midnight girl, one said. Not proper hours, said the other. A man's ranch, the first relented. But I hear she's got away with colts. It went around like that, never landing. Mercy reached for a sack of flour she didn't need and set it back. Folks'll borrow your name when theirs won't buy what they want, she murmured without looking at Mara. You let 'em. Don't sell it. On the way out, old Zeb was parked by the stove with his boots out to the heat, eyes half closed. He cracked one lid as they passed and let a grin hitch his whiskers. Ain't seen a snow like that since '69, he said to nobody. Town flapped its jaw then, too. Storm didn't listen. Back at the ranch, the world had resumed its quiet practice. Hoofbeats sounded different on crust. You could hear a horse testing it. The barn smelled of iodine and a little triumph. Sable's colt had found the bag and made a noise like a saw finding good wood. Mara stood a long minute by the stall rail, watching the small mouth work the teat, the mare's tail flick in a dream, the steam climb and pulled out of sight. A person could live a life inside a minute like that and not notice the years go. Cole came to the rail and didn't lean on it for fear of creak. He held his bandaged arm a hair from his side, the way a man does when he means to be careful because somebody told him to. He glanced once at the colt and once at Mara. Sheriff will bring a warrant when it's worth ink, he said, as if that were conversation. She nodded. Town had things to say. I figured it would. He kept his eyes on the mare. You need me to say something back? I don't need you to say anything that isn't yours, she answered. I need to know if the terms still stand. What terms? That I keep the midnight shift because it's mine, she said, not because it's convenient to you. That I set my hours by the animals first. That I come to the table as a hand and leave it as one. That my work doesn't get traded for favors I didn't ask to owe. Cole's mouth didn't change, but the muscles at the hinge eased. Those were the terms, he said. They stand. They're the only ones I have. You want a raise, you'll tell me when, how much, and why, and I'll argue like a gentleman. The answer was so square it made her laugh once, a breath that warmed the cold spots. I'll hold you to the arguing. "You will," he said, a kind of admiration sitting in the words. He watched the colt butt the bag and blow milk on his own nose. "I slept last night," he said, like a man confessing a sin. "I laid down and I slept through a hinge squeak and didn't get up to fix it in my head." "Storm took your vigilance for a walk," she said. "Or somebody else carried a piece of it for me." He tipped his hat, the smallest thanks a man could make without making a scene. "Either way, I'll not waste it." They walked the row once more, a deliberate quiet between them that wasn't distance. Mercy appeared with 2 mugs, bumped each hand with heat, and faded like a stage hand who knows her cue. Zeb's stool had drifted closer to the bell again, as if the old man and the rope had agreed to be company. Red hummed something under his breath, too low to catch, and surely off-key, as dusk went to the color of a coal's last edge. Tate came with his hair, full of the day, and his mouth full of notions. He took in the barn's warmth and the easy bend of shoulders and clapped his gloves against his thigh. "I've been thinking," he said, which made Red groan softly and Mercy sharpen her gaze for fun. "Back when Ma was alive, we threw a dance after first big storm. Folks came from up the creek and down it. Fiddle, pies, lanterns hung like a fair. Put the winter on notice that it wasn't the only power in the valley." Red scratched his beard. "You mean a winter barn social?" "That's the one," Tate said. He looked at Cole, then at Mara, and found courage in both places. "We got reason enough. Colts on the ground. Fences stood. Sheriff on a trail that ain't ours. Seems to me a man might hang more lanterns than he needs for one night. And no one would call that waste." Cole didn't answer right off. He glanced toward the porch, where the one lantern burned and had been burning. The light through a small path over churned snow and found the barn door the way it always did. He measured something against it and then nodded once. "We'll string 'em from the beams," he said. "If the roof holds a storm, it'll hold a waltz." Tate grinned like a boy who'd gotten away with something. "I'll ride the word." He started for the door, and Mercy slapped a loaf into his hands on the way by. "Mind your manners and your hat," she told him. "And if Miss Anders at the Mercantile asks who's bringing pies, you say I am before she invites herself to my oven." Zeb chuckled into his whiskers. Red muttered something about cleaning a barn twice in 1 week. Mara watched the last of the day thin to thread and break, and felt a warmth that didn't come from coffee or coats. A dance in a winter barn. Fiddles, pies, lanterns, like a small, firm constellation. A town being one thing in the face of another. She put a hand to the ledger and wrote the line that mattered. Storm past. Stock quiet. Sheriff trailing. Winter barn social proposed. Outside the cold came on, even and honest. Inside, plans began that would put music under rafters that had held only weather for too long. The lantern on the porch kept to its coin of light. For the first time since she'd come west, Mara felt the shape of staying fit her shoulders without pinching. They strung lanterns from the rafters before dark, a milky row of small suns, each glass polished to keep its promise. Tate climbed a ladder with twine in his teeth and a hammer in his belt like a man fixing constellations. Mercy set pies to cool on the grain bins and swatted Red's hand with a fork whenever it drifted close. Zeb chalked the packed earth smooth and true so boots wouldn't find surprise. Fiddle cases appeared like birds coming in ahead of weather. Someone tuned a guitar till the notes sat straight. Snowshoe crossing arrived in 2s and 3s, breath puffing, hats powdered, cheeks lit from the ride. The doors slid wide and winter tried to shoulder in. Heat pushed back, coats found pegs, laughter found timbers, the barn held. Mara stood near the tack room a moment longer than needed, palms on the curve of a worn saddle, letting the smells, rosin, apples, lamp oil, clean horse, settle her. She'd pinned her hair in a way Mercy called respectable, and Zeb called a waste of good wind, and she wore a dress the color of creek stones with a clean apron to make it honest. When she stepped out, Sable flicked an ear as if to say she'd be here when the fiddling quit. Cole came through the crowd with his hat in his hands, and the set of a man who meant to do one thing and do it right. He stopped within reach and didn't reach. His eyes said the rest. "Dance with me," he asked, plain as water. She set her palm in his and felt the rough places the winter had written. The fiddles found a waltz that had lived in the valley longer than either of them. Cole's right hand went careful at her shoulder blade. His left found a frame that wouldn't steer so much as keep the edges square. "I'm out of practice," she said. "You're not," he said, and proved it. They turned under lantern light that swung slow with the building's breath. Boots scuffed in time. Mercy's fork tapped time on a tin plate until someone stole it for a triangle. Zeb kept beat with a boot heel and a satisfaction the wind couldn't blow out. The sheriff stood off by a post with steam still rising from his coat and jaw easier than it had been in months. When the music dipped, Cole didn't let go. He cleared his throat once like a man about to speak in a church, with no minister. "Snowshoe," he said, "not loud but enough. This here is Mara Whitcomb. She's the midnight hand of Lantern Ridge. Colts on the ground owe her. So do I." There was a murmur, the good kind that has more nod in it than teeth. Red whooped once and turned it into a cough when Mercy looked sharp. Tate clapped like a boy. The sheriff tipped his hat to Mara and then to the crowd, as if he'd just been waiting for someone to tell the truth so he didn't have to. The talk that had nipped at her heels in town the day before seemed foolish under lamplight and pie crust. Cole leaned close enough that his words didn't travel. They smelled of coffee and the cold he'd walked through to arrive at this. "My mother," he said, "left a line in a letter I ain't quit hearing. Find a partner, not a shadow. Keep the lantern lit till she finds her way." He glanced up at the rafters, at the row of faithful flames. "I kept it burning." Spring to now seemed right. Mara felt the words seat themselves where decisions go when they're ready. "I walk beside Cole," she said, voice even, "or I don't walk with a man at all." "Besides the only place I've got," he answered, "Deshamoon." No flourish to it, just the truth placed on a table. The fiddles picked up again, and someone called a square. Cole stepped back to make room for a line of laughing people to claim the middle. Mercy pressed a plate into Mara's hand that steamed meat and cinnamon at once. "Eat," she said, because that was her religion. "Then dance again so Zeb quits bragging about your step." Zeb, from his stool by the bell rope, moved inside for the night like a guest of honor, grinned through whiskers. "I seen better footwork from a colt learnin' his legs," he lied, proud as a father, "but you'll do." Mara ate and watched neighbors become a town again. Boys who wore rust in their hair from the ore works tried to swagger and had it knocked gentle into rhythm by their partners. Women with flour on their cuffs the other 6 days of the week set their chins and turned pretty because the music said they could. The sheriff took a quiet turn with the schoolmarm and looked surprised to remember how. Cole circled back when the air had warmed enough to fog the bottom of the lantern glass. He didn't ask for permission he hadn't earned. He offered his hand the way a man offers a lift to a friend, and not a rope to a prisoner. She took it because she wanted to. They moved again, slower this time, the kind of step a barn knows by heart. "Tunnel, stop asking the wrong questions now," he said, eyes on the floorboards, because that was his way when a thing mattered. "They'll see what work looks like and what we are when we're not working." "What are we?" she asked, because it was his turn to say it out loud. "A pair," he said, "and a decent one." They danced until the fiddles went to reels too quick for anything but laughing, and then to hymns so soft even Zeb let his heel rest. Outside, The cold sat patient. Inside, breath made weather of its own. When the bow arms dropped and the lanterns guttered to half, Cole walked Mara to the door and held it with a shoulder against a push of night. "Thank you for letting the light fall where my hands could use it," she said. He looked at the row of lanterns and then passed them to the single one out on the porch that had taught them both something about stubborn. "Light's cheap," he said. "Keeping it is the work." Beyond the yard, the ridge threw back a faint shine where a crust had sat. Somewhere out there where prints a lawman could read, when morning put a blade on the weight. World again. Inside, the barn smelled of pie and straw and the kind of sweat a dance demands. The town said good night and meant it. Mara stood a last minute under the rafters, empty plate in one hand, the other on the bell rope that had kept its own counsel. Belonging doesn't always clap you on the back. Sometimes it just stands with you under good light and doesn't ask for a reason. "Lantern's still honest," Zeb said, not able to help himself. "It is," Mara said, and followed the small path of coins of light back toward her cabin, the music still in her bones and the cold kinder for having been kept outside for a while. Morning cracked clean and blue, the kind of cold that makes sound travel farther than it has any right to. Hoof prints from the night before lay preserved under a thin crust. The wind had ironed smooth, photographs, the sheriff had called them. Lyle Mercer rode out before the coffee went quiet, hat brim white with hoarfrost, jaw full like a man with a ledger to balance. By noon the ridge threw back a tin shine and a thin line of riders came off it. Mercer led, a length of rawhide trailing to a second horse. Judd Kincaid had his coat hooded up and his pride cut down to size. His right boot dragged a hair the way his tracks said it would. Two boys rode behind, hats in hands, looking like weather had finally explained itself. No guns were out. No blood had bothered the snow. Mercer swung down at the barn and tied Kincaid to a post the way you'd tie a mean gate that never learned manners. "Found 'em in a dugout that thought it was a house," he said, breath smoking. "Snow wrote their names where my pen didn't have to." He patted the law book in his pocket like a man remembering its weight. "We'll walk 'em into town when the sun quits being stingy." Kincaid glanced at Cole with a twitch of a smile not worth the frost it cost him. "You're lucky the wind was your friend." Cole didn't take the bait. "Wind's honest," he said. "We try to be." Mercer flicked his eyes at Mara, soft as thanks you could miss if you weren't looking. "Bell quiet last night?" "Quiet as a kept promise," Zeb answered for her from his stool he'd dragged back inside. "Boys outside learned to listen." Mercer tipped his hat to that and led his small parade out, iron squealing on crust, justice done in a voice too low for bragging. The day held its breath and then let it out slow. Work came back like a song you don't realize you know until you're humming it. Red set to mending a hinge he claimed had always had a mean streak. Mercy baked as if pie were a county ordinance. Tate ran a pencil down a column and declared, loudly for Mercy's benefit, that the accounts could stand a party every month if a man were foolish enough. Cole disappeared down to the forge, a lean-to off the smithy where the coal heat sat thick as July and the bellows sighed like a tired animal that meant to please. Mara found him there in the late light. He had his shirt sleeves rolled to the good arm, bandaged neat where she'd left it. The anvil rang in small notes as he worked, honest music that didn't need a fiddle to make a man feel steadier. On the stump beside him lay an old horseshoe, thinned at one end from years of going sound miles. He'd cut a narrow strip from it with a hacksaw and drawn it down over the horn, tapped careful to coax a circle out of straight. He worked it back and forth to temper, heated until the iron skin went the color of bread crust, then quenched it with a hiss that smelled of mineral and memory. He burnished it with emery till it shone pale, bright as a coin, not silver, but honest enough to pass for it under a lantern. "From a shoe Juniper wore when she came to us lame," he said, not looking up. "Walked her sound, figured a thing that carried good miles might carry a promise." Mara stood with her palms to the forge heat, snowmelt peeling off her coat hem in small ghosts. The ring sat on the anvil face, a thin band with a seam you had to want to see. He picked it up with tongs, kissed the heat off in the slack tub, and turned it against his thumb to make sure it wouldn't bite a life it meant to bless. They walked to the porch, because that's where true things get said, when there's more sky than roof. The sun was already losing its grip, throwing long boards of shadow across the yard. The lantern at the post burned a steady coin, the same coin that had outlasted spring and summer's dust, and now sat unbothered by winter's teeth. Cole didn't kneel. He was a man built for standing with, and he knew it. He held the ring like a tool he'd made for a job that mattered. Breath hung between them. The cold put a bright edge on everything. "I could say 100 words," he began, and his voice went rough because he wasn't the kind to rehearse feeling. "But I got one that holds the rest. I won't stand in front of you. I'll stand with wind lifted a little at the eaves, curious." Behind them, someone in the kitchen set a pan down, and the sound traveled like church. Mara looked at the ring, then at the man, then at the lantern that had been lit for reasons she now understood in the bones. "I say yes." Her breath smoked the word. "With terms. I keep the midnight shift because it's mine, and because Mars don't care about vows. I keep my craft, and I write it clean in the ledger. When the ranch needs deciding, I get a voice that doesn't wait to be asked. If I say no to a thing that bites at my freedom, the no stands." He didn't flinch. He didn't shape her terms to make them easier to pocket. "Those are the terms," he said, the same square way he'd said a dozen harder things. "They stand. They're the ones I wanted to offer before I knew how." She held out her hand. He slid the band home. It was cool, and then it wasn't. It fit because he'd measured not with a string, but with the time he'd spent watching her work, and the way she held tools and coffee, and her own name. They stood a little while like that, not needing to fix the moment by talking it to death. Then Cole reached for the line of lamps strung along the porch, and turned down each flame with the tender fussiness of a man closing up after a good day. The yard softened. The big sky leaned in. Only the one lantern by the post stayed high and honest. Glass bright, wick sure. From the edge of the yard, old Zeb cleared his throat like a rusty hinge, finding the right oil. "'Bout dang time that lantern found its keeper," he said, grinning into his whiskers. "2 of 'em, looks like." "Mind your poetry, Zeb," Mercy called from the doorway, pretending to scold and failing. "You'll spoil it." Zeb shrugged, pleased with himself for being right in public. Red appeared long enough to tip his cap at Mara and say, "Boss'll argue fair on the books if you let him," which, in Red language, was a wedding toast. The sheriff rode past on his way to town, prisoners strung like bad decisions behind him. He raised 2 fingers to his hat brim without slowing. Justice didn't always dress up for a dance, but it liked to pass through when the music ended. Tate came pelting up the steps and skidded to a stop when he saw the shape of the scene. His mouth forming an O, he swallowed into a grin. "I'll wire the preacher," he said, too loud, then softer. "When you say." "Say it when you're told," Mercy corrected, already pushing a mug of coffee into each set of hands because ceremony without heat is just weather. They drank with the kind of silence that makes a place feel fuller, not emptier. The ring warmed to skin. The porch boards creaked like an old mare shifting weight. Down in the barn, a colt knocked his knees together and found balance again. Annoyed and proud, Mara set her cup down and traced the lantern's glow with her eyes along the path it laid over churned snow, to the barn door, to the bell rope hanging quiet, to the cottonwoods wearing dusk-like shawls. "Light's cheap," she said, borrowing his words and making them theirs. "Keeping, it's the work." "We'll keep it," Cole answered, "not for show, for use." They stood shoulder to shoulder and watched the day finish, not as owners of anything more than the small ground their boots occupied, but as keepers of a thing neither of them claimed to have made alone, a steadiness that could take a winter without lying about it. When the cold finally pushed them inside, Mercy let the door swing an inch longer than needed, so the lantern's coin could flash at them one more time. Behind them, the porch went to shadow. Out in the yard, one light stayed high and unbothered, saying what it had said since spring and would keep saying as long as someone with decent hands trimmed the wick. Spring came on like a shy thing, first in the cottonwoods, green the size of a thumbnail, and then in the ditch water that remembered how to run. Snow slackened, slid off fences in long size shirts, and the yard turned honest mud. Men shed coats like old notions. The bell rope hung limp, more decoration than dare. Horses dozed on their feet with sun warm enough to make them yawn. They picked a Sunday with a wind that didn't bite to stand in Cottonwood Hollow, where the ground held and the creek talked under stones. Tate rode into town before breakfast and came back with the preacher and a Bible held under one arm like a loaf just out of the oven. Sheriff Mercer arrived hatless, hair combed with his fingers and looking like it surprised him. Red had a shirt with buttons all the way up. He left the top too honest. Mercy McRae brought pies enough to feed the county and dared anyone to call it too many. They set 2 sawhorses and a plank for a table and put a mason jar of creek daisies on it and called the place holy. Cole stood in his good coat, bandage long gone, but the memory of it tied to him all the same. He had the ring he'd drawn out of an old horseshoe, bright from the scouring he'd given it that morning till it held a sky of its own. Mara came on Tate's arm because he bullied her into the old custom with a grin, but she walked the last 10 steps by herself. She wore a plain dress, a shade lighter than creek silt, and a ribbon Mercy swore had belonged to a woman on a better day. Sun lit the small blonde threads in her hair. The wind minded its manners. The preacher opened his book and closed it again. "Words know their place," he said, and nodded at Cole. Cole cleared his throat once. He wasn't a man to fatten a sentence when lean would carry. "I kept a light burning since spring," he said, eyes steady. "Didn't know who it was for when I first trimmed the wick." He turned to Mara, and the wind lifted the corner of his mouth the way weather lifts a leaf. "I won't stand in front of you. I'll stand with. I'll keep the lantern honest and the ledger clean. You'll have your say when a thing needs saying, and I'll mind it even when it bends me." Mara's laugh came soft and wet-cheeked. "I'll walk beside or I won't walk at all," she said. "I'll hold the night when it's mine to hold. I'll light the porch when you've ridden long. If a thing bites at my freedom, I'll tell it so, and you'll argue like a gentleman." That raised a cheer out of Red and a stern look from Mercy that failed to hide her smile. The preacher nodded like a man who'd seen both frost and harvest and believed in the line between. He said a few words about yokes and easy burdens, and then Cole slid the iron ring home. It felt cool and then alive, same as it had on the porch the day he'd offered it. They kissed not like actors, but like 2 people who had work to return to with something new stitched into it. Zeb wiped at his whiskers with the back of his hand and said to no one, "Good enough." They ate pie standing up. The sheriff tried to refuse a second slice and failed. Mercy pretended offense and pressed a third into his hand for later. Someone unboxed a fiddle and found a tune small enough to fit under cottonwood shade. Zeb leaned up against a trunk, boots crossed, and tapped time on the bark with a heel. Cole and Mara danced one turn on patchy grass and laughed when they slid, then let go, because laughter was the point. By dusk they'd raised 4 posts at the hollow and set a sill straight as scripture. The start of a house looks like a sketch a child might draw, lines where walls will be, a doorway to a room that isn't yet. Cole sighted along the sill, satisfied. "Windows east," he said. "Mornings ought to come in honest." Mara ran a palm over the new wood and felt it answer. "And a library where the light holds," she added. Cole grinned without showing teeth. "Seems we're decided." Years turn like pages that want reading. The house grew as seasons allowed. A roof in August, a stove that took to fire at the first snow, a shelf that filled with the books Eleanor had taught into them, and a few Mara ordered on notepaper, folded neat. The Lantern Ridge brand found its place on a line of cutting colts that carried their heads like they'd been told a secret and believed it. Buyers rode from as far as the Bitter Roots and went home talking about black stars on dark foreheads and mares that didn't quit when a cow broke wrong. Tate married the mercantile girl after he swore to Mercy he wouldn't let her count his change. Mercy moved into a small cottage with a window that Winter liked and a chair that remembered her shape. She claimed to be retired and cooked anyway. Sheriff Mercer kept a slower jaw and steadier eyes, his tin star dulled by use the way good tools dull and deserve to. Zeb stayed old the way some men do, further in, not farther out. He took to a low stool outside the hollow house and taught a boy named Wyatt how to tie a diamond hitch with rope that had known more years than the child. When Wyatt got hot and tangled and near tears, Zeb hooked a thumb toward the cottonwoods. "Don't fight the wind. Lean with it," he said. "Rope listens better when you do." Wyatt sniffed and leaned, and the knot came good. Zeb lit up like a far lamp catching. "There you are," he said. "Knew you had sense somewhere." They had a girl first, Ruth, who liked the library best and asked questions that put a hitch in a tired man's step till he smiled. Then Wyatt, all knees and cowlick, and a grin that made Mercy pretend she wasn't giving him more than his share of biscuits. Mara kept the midnight shift long past the time a woman might have handed it away just because she could. She slept days when she needed, and not when she didn't, and wrote the ledger in a hand that never lied. When a mare turned wrong, Mara turned her right. When a foal lagged down, Mara rubbed life into him with linen and stubborn and the memory of other nights. Some winters came harder than the one that had tried to make its name on their first. They laid 2 mares deep when ice had gripped a creek crossing, and a colt had come blue and quiet despite prayer and science. Cole stood with his hat to his chest, and Mara with her hands raw, and they didn't make a speech. Mercy said the one thing she always said when a table had to be set inside grief: eat first, fret later. They did. In spring they planted a line of cottonwood cuttings along the ditch, and by fall the leaves were coins shaking in wind that no longer sounded like debt. On Sundays without weather, Cole carried a chair out to the porch and touched the glass of the lantern before he sat, habit and gratitude in one simple reach. At dusk Mara struck a match and trimmed the wick with a small surgical care that looked like love because it was. The coin of light climbed the yard, found the gate, found the barn, and stopped by the bell rope as if it were checking posts on a fence line. Sometimes Cole would say it, mostly to himself, "Lantern's still honest." Sometimes Mara would answer without looking up from the book in her lap, "So are we." They read aloud in the east window, to children who couldn't sit still, and to knights that could. Be strong in will. Strive, seek, find, not yield. The words landed different when a person had mud on their boots and pie cooling by the sill. Zeb would pretend to nap and then finish the line the way Enor had, the hard turn softened by a woman's voice that still lived in these rooms, because they'd built a place where it could. One October, the sheriff rode out with his hat pushed back and his smile ready. "Can't stay. Just needed to pass by a place that remembers its promises," he said, and then was gone like always. A late snow came mean and early one year, tried the roof and the fences and their tempers, they leaned with it. Mara turned a colt by feel with Ruth watching and learning the quiet math of hands. Wyatt carried hot water in a bucket too big for him and sloshed it on his boots and laughed because he didn't know yet that laughter is a thing a person should protect. Coal held light. Mercy scolded the kettle into being braver. Zeb, half asleep by the door, had his hand around the bell rope like a man keeping company with an old friend who didn't need talking to. When spring took its time that year, and then came all at once, cottonwood grease on thumb and damp earth that smelled like forgiveness, they walked down to the hollow at supper's edge. The house had settled into the land. A place learns to wear itself if you let it. The creek said the same things it had always said, and found new stones to say them around. Cole's arm found Mara's waist without asking its way. Her shoulder found his without looking. "You ever regret it?" he asked, not because he needed a guarantee, but because asking had become a way of tidying the day. Answering a handbill that told you to watch the night for a stranger who hadn't slept in years. Mara looked where the lantern's path would fall when she lit it in a few minutes, across the step, down the yard, over 2 sets of boot tracks, to a barn that had learned both storm and dance. She thought of a stagecoach and a saloon, and a man who'd said pay plain and meant it, of a scarf thrown by an old hand and a bandage tied square, of a breech colt that chose the right side of life because someone told him to like he'd listen. "No," she said, "I found my way home by working. Then I found you standing where the light reached." He kissed her hair and tasted a day's dust and soap and something that had no word except ours. Down by the porch, Wyatt whooped at a lark he thought he'd scared. Ruth shushed him and pointed at the east window because the page wanted finishing. Zeb snored once and lied about it. Mercy banged a pan for the satisfaction of the noise. Mara struck the match. Flame flared, then settled. She trimmed the wick and set the glass. The porch lantern took hold and threw its coin across the evening, same as it had done since a spring that had changed the shape of a man's sleep and a woman's road. It found the gate. It found the barn. It found the life they had made by walking beside and keeping small promises till they were big enough to warm a valley. "Lantern's still honest," Cole said, as if the light had asked for company. "And we'll keep it so," Mara answered, and when the wind came up, it was the kind that lifts hair and carries laughter and leaves fences standing. That's our trail for tonight. Quiet courage, clean work, and a lantern that stayed honest. If the cold got in your bones, comment 0. If the light felt warm, comment 1. Saddle up with a subscribe so you don't miss the next ride. I'll keep the lantern trimmed till you're back.